Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Unfollowing Mum. I have a guest with me this week, and this feels like it was just the universe speaking to us because we got in touch on Instagram and it just felt like we were talking about manifesting, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, I'd like to come on your podcast. And I was looking for a guest to come on and chat. So perfection. And my guest is Natasha Nyeke. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've just rushed back from sports day to do this because I'm really excited about it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. And can you tell people who are not familiar with you a little bit about yourself, please?
Okay, so I am Natasha. I am a therapeutic coach. And what I do, I specialize in working with mums um, from, I'd say, fertility, birth, and beyond. My background is in family work. So the reason I decided to specialize in working with mums is I work with so many children who struggled with loads of different issues, but at the root, it was always the relationship with the mum and lots of learned behaviour from their parents. And the problem with that work was we were meant to work with the children, but actually, if we could work with the mums, then we get to help the children.
Yeah.
And so when I qualified, I actually qualified just after I became a mum. So I
Okay.
learned even more about attachment and like creating healthy children and the importance of me being healthy. And I think my biggest belief is that like if I'm happy, then my kids are going to be happy.
Yeah, and I think that's so important is having that happiness in yourself and working
Mm,
on yourself as a parent. And I don't think that journey ever finishes. I
no.
think I look back at myself, and I've said this so many times on the podcast. I look back at myself as a parent to my eldest when he was a toddler,
Mm,
and I am worlds apart. And with each child, I've gained awareness, I've gained knowledge. I've had to have some
mm,
really awkward conversations with him and sort of say, actually, I know you keep saying, I'm not bothered, mum. But the
mm,
way I behaved towards you then, that wasn't cool. That wasn't healthy. And I
mm.
need you to understand that that's okay if you want to come and talk to me about that when you're older. And he's like, oh, mum, for God's sake, I'm fine. And I'm like, no, I just need you to understand that
Yeah.
actually I'm a very different parent now. And that's not because I love you any less. It's because I have better awareness and understanding now of what it means to be a healthy parent. So, what is it that drew you to that kind of work?
So what I was thinking about this yesterday, and I think that working in a helping role, why did I think I didn't grow up with the happiest childhood. And I grew up, I had like a very normal childhood. There was, no big, do you know about big T trauma and small T trauma?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But just for listeners that don't, can you give us a little
Okay.
outline of it?
So big T trauma is so say child abuse, a big accident, a parent dying, even a divorce is big T trauma. Whereas it was for me, everything was very normal. I had no big traumas. I had two parents. We were like comfortable. We had a really like normal from the outside life.
Mm.
But I think through my own journey, what I've realized is that I didn't have a very happy childhood
Yeah.
because my parents struggle in their own ways. They had very, very difficult upbringings, both of them. My dad's from Zimbabwe and he grew up during apartheid and he was very poor. And my mum grew up without either of her parents. She was actually brought up with her great aunt.
Okay.
And and her mum was in and out of her life. She doesn't know her dad. And so I think that they don't really, they didn't have the skills. They hadn't been taught the skills to raise children. So all my basic needs were met, but the joy that I think I want to bring into motherhood and like just like joy in life, I think that that's what was missing. And I didn't
Mm.
realize till I got older that that was what I really missed. And I started working actually in children's homes, and I loved working in children's homes. I love talking to people. I love learning about people. And I think the more I learn about other people's lives, I think for me, it just excites me to understand people and to like figure out how they tick and why they do these things and where that comes from and what makes them happy. And I think that if we do that work, we can be happy. But my parents never knew that you can work to be happy. It was like life's hard
Yeah.
and you get on with it.
Mm, mm. That I think that's a common thread for so many people of older generations of life is hard and you've just got to get on with it. I know one of my mum's favorite phrases was life is unfair and
Yes.
you've just got to suck it up and get on with it. And absolutely to a degree that's true. I think anyone who's grown up in a toxic family dynamic knows that life is tough and you do have to get on with it because the alternative isn't very nice. But it's invalidating at the same time because there
Mm.
has to be a conversation around why it's just unfair and how can we make the bits that are unfair, how can we work with those, how can we move forward through them, and how can we find that joy, like you say. And when you talk about little t trauma, what would be some examples of that for people that don't know?
The small T trauma would be parents who aren't attuned with you, parents who aren't able to communicate, parents who what would I'm trying to think, what would I call a small T trauma? Parents who push you really hard. So
Mm,
your academic success is how you feel loved.
yeah.
Parents who expect you to be good all the time. They don't expect you to be children.
Mm,
Um, Parents who can't manage your difficult emotions, or parents who blame you when life gets hard rather than being able to own their own difficult emotions.
mm. I think that's often really overlooked. And I think for some people, I know there's always a little bit of controversy around that big T and small T trauma. If some people find it a little bit invalidating, but actually, I think it gives a voice to the people who say, "Well, I can't really have childhood trauma
Mm.
because it wasn't that bad. Nothing terrible happened to me." And there's almost sort of a divide between no, I had this horrific childhood. I was abused in this way and I was abused in that way. And then those emotional abuses where your needs physiologically were met,
Mm.
but the rest of them were just so overlooked because your parents didn't have the capacity or were unwilling to look after those. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that that has a huge impact on us. And that's where that generational trauma really comes into play.
That's the thing. It's like I don't really like to use the word trauma because I think of a lot of people, they are scared of that word,
Mm,
and it like
mm,
it can really shut you down. But I was having a really interesting conversation with my supervisor last week, and she said, "What was your?" She one of the questions she likes me to ask my clients is, "What's their favorite childhood book or childhood film?" And I was like, "Well, mine was Little Mermaid," and we were talking about how Ariel has no voice.
yes.
And she
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
that means something if you felt you had no voice. So I grew up and I was very, very private. I didn't share anything. I and my
Mm,
mum, I'm really close to my mum, but one of the things she always says, you're so private, you don't talk about anything. And what I've learned is that I learned not to talk about anything because you couldn't handle my emotions. So
mm,
I learned don't talk about stuff. You have to deal with things on your own. And those are the kind of things that we pass down because
yeah.
we don't address them. The big T trauma it's okay to address, like that's
Mm,
bad enough, but it's
mm,
like I want people to looking after their mental health it to be as normal as looking after your physical health. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm struggling with anxiety. Well, why won't I talk to someone about that? If you've got a cold, you go and get some Lemsip. If
yeah.
you've got like a headache, you go and see a doctor. You do something, but
Hmm.
we just normalize. I'm just one of those people who doesn't talk about anything. Oh, I'm just someone who worries all the time. Oh, yeah, I just get low and I sleep a lot. Like it's just something that we just have to accept, and there's nothing we can do about us. It's who we are.
Yeah. And we absolutely can do those things about it, but we choose not to. And that's when we end up passing these things down. So, growing up, what did that look like for you?
So growing up, I lived with my brother, my mum, and my dad. My dad wasn't there that much just because he was working.
Mm,
He was at work a lot. And that's what I don't think I realized how much he was at work. But my mum says I did everything on my own.
yeah.
I was always on my own. Like I think she was pretty much like a single parent. My um my parents, the only thing I remember, I don't have that many memories of my childhood. And
Yeah.
this is something that I know isn't there's a reason I don't have
Yeah.
many memories because my mum's constantly like, oh, you remember this, you remember that. I'm like, I don't remember loads, but they argued a lot. There was a lot of shouting in my house, a lot of arguing. No one knew how to talk about
Mm.
anything. And now I have had a lot of conversations with my mum about that, and we've had to do a lot of work around that together, which has definitely brought us closer. But I understand her better, and now it's more like we're two adults,
Yeah.
and rather than necessarily she's my mum and I'm the daughter, but we're like two adults who've got our own flaws and we understand each other. I think I understand her better than she understands me, which she can find at times frustrating. I think she's coming round to it.
Yeah.
She's coming
Yeah.
round to it, and I really would love her to have therapy, and she talks about it, but
Yeah. I
there's
think
some fear.
everybody can say that
Yeah.
everybody who listens to this podcast could categorically say, I'd love for my parent to actually
Yeah.
go to therapy. I'd love for them to learn about themselves. And I think it's important and interesting that you talk about having that relationship now with your mum where you can meet each other as two adults. Because my situation's very different.
Mm.
My mum wouldn't absolutely not be willing to do that, would not be willing to sit with me and hear me. There would be a lot of invalidation going on. So what does that look like when you are able to sit with your mum and have those conversations?
No, I'd say it wasn't always like this.
Yeah.
No, and I have had, obviously, I've done a lot of training. So I think communicating it's my thing. I just actually had to have a conversation with my husband's mother a minute ago because they've had an argument. And
Oh,
I had to be the one who was like, okay, like, can we just like talk like this and this, talk about this? And there have been lots of times where it's been arguments. My mum wants to argue.
okay.
That's her go-to is we shout and there's no repair. And
Yeah.
then so learning to not shout and then making sure we have the repair, I say, is probably the biggest thing and the thing she will find tricky. And she will at times be the one who cries, and the same with my mother-in-law actually. They'll cry and then it's like feel sorry for me because I'm crying, and actually having to
Mm,
like stay in that adult place of like just because I don't cry doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Like it's
yes.
not necessarily that's because you can't manage. I can talk in a calmer way,
Mm,
and I think now we're at a place where I really understand her anxiety. I didn't know she was anxious before. Didn't
yeah.
know it at all. And there'll be a lot of times where she will say, so say if I ask her to do something, I was explaining this to a friend yesterday, who had a similar thing with her mum. If I ask my mum to do something for me, like have my kids, immediately it'll be like, no, like, and just stress.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
she always comes round. So basically everything's a big deal. Everything is a big deal. Everything is
Mm,
overwhelming for her. She'll always come round and she'll like ring me in a couple of days and be like, yeah, it's fine, yeah, I can do that. So
yeah.
we've managed it a lot of the time. My husband will do things like ask her for things. And also she just has that self-awareness now that actually when I get put on the spot with anything, even if it's not on the spot, I feel like I'm being put on the spot.
Okay. Mm,
But it's been years of it. I remember having a huge conversation when I was pregnant about and saying like the way you're acting is like you're jealous of like me being happy.
mm,
And
mm.
that was a horrible conversation because it was like I didn't understand it, she didn't understand it, and I think what it was hard to see me having a baby and it being quite nice and it being quite smooth, and my dad wasn't around.
Yeah.
Like she says that when she was in labour and my dad wasn't there, he was working. He was like, "Oh, I'll come at the end."
Mm,
And
mm.
they're still together, and their relationship is still unhealthy, and
Yeah.
they're great grandparents. But
Yeah.
my biggest wish for my mum is I just want my mum to be happy, and I think she doesn't know how to be happy.
Mm. And that's such a big thing, isn't it? In not knowing how to be happy, not knowing
Mm.
how to express yourself. And I think it really resonates with me what you say about that almost combative style of not being able to have the conversation. Everything devolves into shouting or
Mm.
crying and sitting in that victim space,
Mm.
and then being unable to build the repair because we
Mm.
all shout, we all lose our shit
Mm.
sometimes, but actually it's in the repair that relationships are saved. It's in the repair that we can look back and reflect and take a bit of accountability. And when you feel like you are the continual victim, and you have a parent who feels like they are, who occupies that space and insists on sitting there and doesn't have the emotional maturity to say, actually, I get what you were trying to say. It wasn't a personal attack. It was you need to think about how you speak to me. You need to, I feel like you're jealous of me when I'm happy. All of these things that, yes, can be really confronting, but could be an eye-opening conversation. It's really difficult to get through to them. And it feels impossible sometimes to keep your own cool. And I think one of the things that came up for me a lot with my mum.
I don't always keep my cool,
yeah, and that's really
don't.
important to say, because I often felt like when I would have conversations with my mum, I was not a nice version of me. I wasn't kind. I would lose my temper and I could be really spiteful sometimes. I feel that could be me being hard on myself. Now I'm thinking on it, I'm like, oh, were you? Or were you just reasonable? But I think sometimes you look at yourself and you start to think, no, I don't like the person that I become when I'm around you. And it's holding those boundaries both with yourself and being able to say, no, I'm hurt and I'm trying to have a conversation with you, but also holding that boundary with them.
And I think boundaries is a huge thing, because I also don't spend loads of time with her. So like, I'll do an afternoon, but I don't want to be with my mum. Like, I don't need to speak to my mum every day. I don't need to be, I mean, we have talked about going on holiday together, and I did go on holiday with her a few years ago and it was lovely. But I need to have those boundaries of like not too much time together, because she's very negative and I find it quite draining. And I do accept she's really working on that, because she knows I find it hard. She knows I find one of her sayings, you were talking about your mum's sayings, was always expect the worst and everything else is a bonus. And that's
Yeah.
like, that had such a huge impact on my mindset for such a long, I think it still does. It's like I fight against it all the time and I'm constantly battling with that doubt, but that is such a huge part of who I am. Always expect the worst, everything else is a bonus. That when I spend time with her, it slowly, like, I don't want to be that low vibe person again.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've worked really hard to be an optimistic person, to be secure in who I am, to be open to doing things that are uncomfortable. And I think her energy is just the absolute opposite of that.
Yeah, and that's really struck with me, because I had a question from somebody on my Instagram community on the Unfollowing Mum page who had said to me, I never know where I stand, because I have people saying to me, you need to think about your grandma and you need to love her and look after her. She's in a really negative space at the minute, but she's always in a negative space and she really drags me down. What do I do? Because on this side of the fence, I've got people saying, you need to look after yourself, prioritize yourself, don't have contact with her. And on the other side of the fence, I've got people going, well, aren't you awful? She's in a bad place at the minute. And it's like, I can't win. And ultimately, the only thing you can do is find your path in it, because other people's path won't work for you.
Everyone's is different.
Everyone's is different. But that fighting against those internal messages that you've been brought up with screams at me, because it's something that I feel I'm constantly doing. And I think when you get to a point, whether that is where you've got your firm boundaries and you have some kind of contact or a relationship, but you have it with firm structured boundaries that work for you, or whether you're like myself who has no contact whatsoever, once you get past that point where the relationship is looking somewhat how you need it to look for you to survive in it, it's then what? It's then all the self-work that I think people don't really talk about as much. You would spend a lot of time focused on, well, it's okay to cut contact, or it's okay to have these boundaries, it's okay to do that. Yeah, great. What about afterwards, when you've got all
So
those
much
things in
guilt.
place? Oh, so much work to do. And especially when you're a parent.
So much, and there's so much, like, no one knows how to make me feel guilty like my mum.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Like
yeah.
that, and that's the thing. And it's so hard to navigate that. Like, oh, okay, I know she wants to see my kids more. I know she wants to see me more. Like, but I and having to do you know what, it's not like a straight line of like this works. It's a constant juggle of like, okay, sometimes I want to see her more, sometimes I can't, like sometimes I have to step back. It's
Mm.
always a work in progress. And she says she will, I know she would want to spend more time with me, but I don't think she actually would. It's just
Mm.
like she feels like she should spend more time with me because I'm her child.
Mm. Mm.
But the problem is that she's not that happy in her life, where I am happy in my life and I have a very full life. And that's really difficult.
Mm.
And then I
Mm.
think that's a lot of the guilt. Like, I want my
Mm.
mum to be happy, of course I do, but I
Yeah.
can't make her. It's not my job to make her happy.
Yeah, I think that's a huge realization as an adult
Mm,
child who's grown up, feeling like you're responsible for your parents' happiness or
mm,
feeling like you're responsible for
mm,
their emotions, especially if
mm,
you've been parentified and you've been placed in that role of caregiver
mm,
and placed in that role of almost like a stand-in spouse or stand-in
mm,
support, stand-in therapist. It's really difficult to make your
mm,
peace with. It's not my job to make you happy. It's
mm,
not my responsibility to cater to your emotions. I
mm,
want you to be happy. I want you to be fulfilled, but you
mm,
have to get there for yourself. And there's so much conditioning that you fight against with that.
so much, so much. And and that's one of the things I don't, it's on my kids, I don't think feel like it's their job to make me happy. Like
Mm,
it's such a different relationship. It's my
yeah.
job to make them happy.
Mm,
And I, so I talk to my kids about everything. And when you were talking about talking to your son and him saying, "Oh, I'm not. Oh, I don't care, mum. I don't care." I'm that over communicating mum, and they're not really listening, and they might
yeah.
not understand. But you can really, like, my daughter's 6 now, and I can really feel now at 6 that the stuff that I've been saying to her for all this time, I start to hear things coming out of her mouth that
Mm,
you feel like, oh, they're in one ear and out the other, they're not listening, but they are, because like it's going into their subconscious. And yeah, it's tricky. But I mean,
yeah.
also raising children who are aware of their emotions is also tricky, because it would be much easier a lot of the time to just tell them to shut up and shout at them and
Yeah.
swear at them and like
Yeah, it is.
so much
I think it's
easier.
so much easier. And I think sometimes when you've had that upbringing, I saw a really great reel the other day that was talking about how when you have a child and you look at them and you think, God, I was so much more mature than you at that age, and I was so much more, aware of things than you at that age. But actually that's what we want. We want them to
Mm.
be children, and
Want to be
you
kids.
didn't get that. You want them to be kids, but when they have those big emotions as well, especially when it's emotions that you're uncomfortable with, when it's
Mm.
emotions that you experienced in a really negative way when you were a child, or you were told that that emotion was unsafe, I think that's really, really difficult to navigate.
Mm. One of the things I've really been noticing recently is I I remember in my training having to get used to crying,
Mm,
because I remember I was doing when we there was one time I was being um what's it called, monitored or tested. It had like a
mm,
test or
yeah.
something, and the lady I was working with started crying when we were doing our session, and I changed the subject. And at the end of the session, my supervisor said, "Why did you change subjects?" I said, "Oh, I didn't want to make her cry." And he was like, "You don't make someone cry. If they're
Yeah.
crying, they're crying." So I'm just comfortable with crying. And I don't mean all the time, like yesterday my son got in and he was so whingy and just tired from school. But in general, if they hurt themselves and they cry, they hurt themselves and they cry and they hurt
Yeah.
themselves. It doesn't matter. Like that's what when you hurt yourself, you cry. That's okay. And I hear all the time, stop crying, or oh, don't make them cry. And
Yeah.
it's just like, no, it's okay to cry. It's
Mm.
okay if I cry. It's okay if they cry. People can cry. It doesn't have to be something that we're terrified of.
Yeah. And when you were younger, were those messages of don't cry and don't express that kind of emotion, was that very much something that was a no-no for you?
I think there was just, I only remember shouting. Yeah, I think that crying definitely was a, yeah, my dad doesn't like it. He doesn't,
Mm.
My dad, I definitely think my dad would actually give in to me if I cried. That would be one of the things, that he didn't
Yeah.
like me to cry, and he might get angry and then he'd come and he'd feel guilty. Whereas my mum, I don't remember her even reacting. My mum, I think, gets so caught up in her own emotions that I don't
Yeah.
think she does talk a lot about how I was really difficult because I was always having tantrums and I was always having meltdowns. So yeah, actually, I'm saying that now. No,
Yeah.
definitely wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like a difficult child in
Mm.
her opinion. And I think, was I difficult or was I just, I think she has actually said to me now, I think because my daughter's very emotional and she says, I don't think you were difficult. I think you were just a girl and girls are more emotional. And I just didn't realize that your brother wasn't so emotional. So he seemed easier.
Mm. Yeah, I think that message of you're the difficult child
Mm,
is one that so many people have
mm.
experienced. And is it difficult or is it just you've not got the capacity to deal with it?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Emotional.
Yeah, just emotional. And I think, especially with my daughter, I do notice that I don't know if it's so much that she's more emotional. I think she's getting to the stage where she can be quite hormonal. And
Mm,
I feel very lucky that that is something that I'm okay with, that I
mm.
can deal with the mood swings. And I think kids in general, to be fair, the mood swings when they're
The mood
tired,
swings
when
is
they
the
come up.
thing, is tough.
Yeah, and it is tough, it is difficult, but it's working on yourself and your capacity for it, like you say, and getting curious. I think when those moments pop up where you feel really uncomfortable, or your natural
Mm,
go-to is to tell them to stop or to try and appease.
mm,
And it doesn't necessarily just have to be crying. There are so many different emotions that they come out with when they're loud, when they're overexcited, when they're
mm,
angry, all these different things. When you find it particularly confronting, that's when you have to start asking, how come? And get a bit
mm,
curious about yourself
mm.
and think, what is it that's going on there for me that I find that so difficult to deal with?
And I think that life is so much easier when you can look inward, because
Yeah.
I can't control their behavior, but I can
Mm,
control mine.
mm,
Like that, it's like, what can I do? Like if I'm really overwhelmed, generally there's a reason. Like
mm-hmm.
yesterday, I was trying to do something in the garden, and my kids wanted me to water balloons. I was getting overwhelmed because I was trying to do two things at once, and it was just
Yeah.
like eventually it was like, just forget it. You're not going to paint the fence.
Mm, yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't do it now. I know it's annoying, and I know you want to do it, but you're just going to end up losing your temper if you try and do. They want you to do this thing, and they're not going to leave you alone, and they're going to keep asking and keep asking and keep asking, and actually just give up and do it another time.
Yeah. And picking your battles as
Yeah.
well, as
Mm,
opposed to sort of saying, I've got to do everything and be everything for everyone all at once, which is
mm,
something that I think mums do so much
mm,
is, and I do think there is an element of almost overcompensating, especially if you had an emotionally absent parent or an absent parent altogether,
mm.
of that kind of overcompensating, of
Definitely. And I
wanting to
see
be
that a lot.
everything. Yeah. Yeah. Do
I
you see
see
that with you or do you see that with your clients, do you think?
with my clients, I see that a lot. I think the first time round, maybe more, I
Mm.
probably did that. And I do wonder if maybe that's why my daughter is so emotional.
Yeah.
Because, you're learning with your first, aren't you?
Mm.
But with my clients, I see a lot of just being terrified that we're going to mess them up.
Yeah.
Just have this terrible fear, and this, everything I do, anytime I do anything wrong, I'm going to mess them up. And I
Mm.
think one of the things that is so helpful that I learned years ago from a social worker was that a good parent gets it right 30% of the time. Like,
Mm.
we're not going to be getting it right all the time. We're not
Mhm.
robots. Like, we can't never make mistakes. We can't never mess up. But the other 30% is probably messing up, and the other 30% is repair.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the thing that I never had, and which is what me and my mum have had to work on, is the repair, because it's just, I don't know. I feel, I don't know if it is. I think repair is a very generational thing. I think,
Mm.
I know that there are some parents that won't be able to do it, but I think it's not like my mum wouldn't have even known. Oh, you
No.
say sorry. She doesn't say sorry.
Mm.
So to say sorry to your children is just a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and that is such a massive thing, is that inability to say sorry, especially to your children. I do think, again, generationally, and it's not making excuses. I think there's a massive difference between excuse and reason, and we quite
Mm,
often forget that we can look at something and say, yeah, that's a reason, not an
mm,
excuse,
mm.
and that they have to learn and do better. But generationally, children were seen, not heard, and you
Yeah.
certainly would never apologize to a child because that would be to show weakness when
Mm,
actually there's so much strength in apologizing. And I
mm.
think in apologizing to our children, we teach them how to apologize. How
Yeah.
often do we say to our kids, especially when they're toddlers and things, and they're like, snatch a toy and they're
Mm,
being all feral? Oh, no, say sorry there, that wasn't kind. What would you say? You would say sorry. But then when
mm.
we're unkind, which we will be sometimes, no, parent doesn't apologize.
Yeah.
And that's such an older generation thing. And I think we are getting much better at it, of being able to apologize and to hold ourselves accountable and to go to them and build that repair. I think repair is something that every parenting class should include, and none of
Yeah.
them do. None of
And
them.
I just think it's so odd. Like this morning, I was getting ready for school and we were running late and I was getting stressed. And I just would just say, like I'm rushing and rushing. And then as we leave the door, I say, sorry, I'm getting really stressed because I don't like it when we're late to school and I don't want you to be late. And it feels so minor, but it's such a huge difference to how I would have been told, like, you've made us late.
Yeah. Yeah. That real blaming, and then comes
Yeah.
with that it's we consider it guilt, but actually it's shame masquerading as guilt,
Mm,
isn't it? Because it's the
yeah.
message that you are taught. Guilt is something that we feel, that's an oftentimes healthy response to, it's our conscience popping up, it's our Jiminy Cricket coming up and saying, look, you've done something wrong here. But as a child, you're not responsible for making sure everything gets sorted and that you're out the door. As a parent, you are.
Mm.
But it's really difficult to regulate when you've got
Yeah, it's very
kids
difficult.
just being
And they
wild.
kids and being slow
Yeah,
and
so
ignoring
slow.
you.
So slow. My Now that my boys are older,
Yeah.
one of them will quite literally sit on his phone and he'll be like watching YouTube. And
Mm.
I'll say to him, can you put your sock on? And he's got like one foot, one hand on the phone, one hand
Yeah.
pulling a sock on. And I'm like, dude, put your phone down. I think being able to name our emotions as
Mm,
well is saying to them, I'm getting really overwhelmed here.
mm.
That's really important, because I
Yeah.
don't think, and I don't know about you, but I don't think I ever had my mum's emotions named to me. And I
No.
certainly never had it with my dad. My dad was very much the absent dad. And I don't think that I ever had a role model naming emotions
Mm,
and then holding themselves accountable if that emotion got away from them, being able to say, actually, I'm getting really angry here. It was a threat. It wasn't a, I'm getting angry or I'm beginning to feel angry. Can we do da da da? It was, I'm getting really angry with
mm.
you. And it was done in that aggressive, I'm going to intimidate you into falling in line. And that's the difference in being able to actually name your emotions.
But I do think we have to learn to name our emotions.
Mm,
And
mm,
that is a big part of my job. Okay, like okay, what are you feeling? Tell me what what are you feeling? And I don't think my mum would have known she was overwhelmed. She would just know she was angry.
yeah.
Uh, One of the things I have like a feelings wheel, and we're like, okay, I want it. Have you seen a feelings wheel?
Yeah, I love the feelings
Okay.
wheel. Yeah.
And it's like anger's a secondary emotion, but what other emotion are you feeling?
Yeah.
What other? And I don't. It's having the language.
Mm,
It's I had a conversation with my husband the other day about envy and jealousy and like the shame of being jealous. And it was like, no, you are jealous sometimes. That's
yeah.
okay. And he was like,
Hmm.
I don't like saying that. I was like, yeah, but that it's a fact. Like we're humans, we feel jealous, right?
Hmm.
But we put shame on that,
Yeah.
and we've always it's just easier to be angry or
Hmm.
to be happy
Yeah.
and not to really have many other emotions.
No, I think something that, because I've introduced my kids to the feelings wheel, I've got it in my office for when I work with clients. And I think the feelings wheel is something that it, so many of the emotions on there, we look at it, and half of the time, I think people have never said, oh, I feel this way, and actually
Mm,
named that emotion, because it's something, it's not something that we were taught to do. As you
no.
say, anger is kind of, you've got angry, you've got sad, you've got happy. I often think about, inside out,
Yeah.
those very base level emotions. When you look at the feelings wheel, there's so many. And I like what they've done with Inside Out too, where they've widened it
Oh, I
out. And as
loved
you get, I
it.
think it's amazing. And it's a
Amazing.
great way to explain to kids that there's all these other emotions
Mm.
that are knocking about inside us that are valid and that are okay. But we do have a tendency to almost like dipstick certain emotions into
Mm.
shame
Mm.
and feel like they are a wrong emotion. I saw a great creator the other day, and I cannot remember her name, but she was talking about how every single feeling that you have is valid. Every feeling
Everyone.
is valid. Every single one of them, regardless of whether it's right, if you
Mm.
like, your feeling is valid.
Mm.
What's not valid always is what you do with that feeling
Yeah.
afterwards. That's where the
Mm.
problem comes in, is how you act on that feeling. But whatever you're feeling is
Mm.
valid. If you're feeling sad because somebody's called you out, or you're feeling confronted because somebody's called you out on something you've done that's upset
Mm.
them, that's valid. But now what? You've got to act on it
How do you
differently.
deal with it?
Yeah, we were never taught
Mm.
that.
We weren't, we weren't taught about emotions. And I think it's amazing at school. I don't know about all schools. My daughter's school is fantastic with emotions. They teach
Mm.
them about emotions. They teach them about mindfulness. I know that there is so much more, but communication is something that is so important to every single human being. But we don't know how to do it, and we
No.
just think like we should know how to communicate, but we have to learn. Even like for me now, I've had so much therapy, I've had so much coaching, but I still have to often journal to know what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm upset, and then when I write it down, say I've had an argument with my husband and I'm upset about because he's gone out, he hasn't listened to me about something, and then I write down and actually it's because I feel unloved, or I feel like he doesn't want to spend time with me, or there can be, there's so much underneath it,
Mm-hmm.
and we just think we just should know this stuff. I just think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's odd that we expect ourselves to know how to communicate
Yeah.
when most of us don't.
No, we don't know, and we don't. I think it's not an uncommon feeling as well. I've found with adult children who've grown up
Mm.
with this dysfunctional family to not really know what they are feeling.
Mm.
I hear that quite often from people that will say, I just feel, and then there's almost like a stumbling block of, I'm
Mm.
not sure, I don't know what that is. I'm not sure what that feeling is. I feel resentful, I feel angry, I feel hurt, but it's pinpointing. And I think we quite often expect feelings to be, I feel a certain way,
Mm.
insert feeling here, and then you're
Yeah.
done. Whereas you can have this whole jumbled up mess of feelings.
Mm.
And it's much more complicated than I think we ever allow for. And again, especially as a parent.
Mm. Yeah. Because I mean, as a parent, you feel like a million different feelings in 10 minutes.
Yeah, constantly. I think that's children as well. Children are constantly on the go and feeling so many different feelings.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to invalidate those feelings.
Mm. Mm. But what I love about children is that they feel their feelings. I think there's
Mm.
so much we can learn from a toddler. Like, oh, I'm angry, then I let my anger out. Or
Yeah.
I'm sad and I let my sadness out. Whereas we're like, oh, I feel sad, ignore it. I feel angry, ignore it. I feel,
Yeah.
and then we explode like volcanoes. And I'm
Mm.
not saying we're going to be lying on the floor kicking and screaming, but actually, if we could be a bit more moment to moment, like, oh, okay, well, that hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
Or like, when you say that, it makes me feel like rather than having to just ignore all the time
Mm. Yeah.
and then
And we
explode.
suppress so much, don't we? And that's the thing, that's
Mm.
when you do explode. So, with your relationship with your mum now, you mentioned that she will quite often have the kids. Have you noticed a difference now that she's developed some of this self-awareness and you've done the work with your children and with yourself and with her? Have you noticed that she's different with them to how she was when you were younger?
She's very different with them, and she's actually very respectful of how I parent, and I do actually feel like she respects me as a mum. The
Mm.
only thing I would say that she struggles with is she still does, this isn't a new thing. She doesn't sit still. She's always doing something. when she has them, she needs to constantly be tidying up their mess, and she can't be uncomfortable. If something is uncomfortable, she has to deal with it straight away. So
Yeah.
I would say I wish she would just sit down.
Yeah, just chill.
Just sit down. And I know when I was a kid, that's what I would have wanted. I would have wanted her to just sit down with me. And I know that she didn't feel like she could, because we always had students and my dad wasn't there, and she felt like she had to do everything all the time. And she said to me, "Oh, I always had my washing put away." I said, "Yeah, because you didn't play with her." Like, yeah, you did. You did have all this time to do all this stuff, because if we asked you to sit down, you would have said no.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's quite, your kids will tell you, won't they, in those moments of, can you come and sit with me? Can you come and sit with me? Or can you come and play with me? It's never just, can you come and sit with me? Or can you come and play with me? And that's not to make someone feel guilty, because in those moments they don't. They've got their laundry to put away. They've got other things to do. But your kids do take note of when you say no. And it's when it becomes a consistent pattern of no, and you're not prioritized as a child.
Yeah. And it's such a balance, because obviously we have to say no, and we have to do certain things. The other day my kids wanted me to sit on the sofa with them, and I needed to make dinner.
Yeah.
Like, I need to feed the dogs because my dogs are barking. I need to make you dinner because my 3-year-old, if I don't make him dinner, he's gonna get hangry and then he won't eat, and like,
yeah.
and
Hangry is also a very valid emotion that I experience on a regular basis.
Yeah. A huge one in my house. My husband and my son get hangry a lot.
Yeah.
But it's that balance of like, I want to just sit with you, but I know that I've got to do these things, and if I don't do these things, like, and that is that battle as mums that we feel all the time. And that other day when I was sitting there, I was thinking, this is how my mum felt. This is exactly how my mum felt. It's just, unfortunately for me, the washing and stuff would have won.
Yeah.
And it's not because she didn't care, but it's just because I am better at regulating my emotions. I am better at thinking, I feel overwhelmed, and I need to do these things to make myself feel less overwhelmed. And it's not necessarily putting the washing away. Sometimes it's taking a few deep breaths. Sometimes it's having a conversation with my kids and explaining to them why, rather than just always doing the thing that will make me feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think for me, taking a deep breath and doing some breathing it helps me survive parenting.
Yeah. Taking a deep breath is a very, very overlooked parenting skill. I know that sounds so silly, and people but think back to all those times when your parent became overwhelmed, or your parent was being unkind, or whatever it might have been. If they had just taken a breath and been able to just hit pause for a second. And I will quite often say to my son in particular, now he's 13, he will look at me and I will be looking at him and be like, why are you looking at me like that? And I'll be like, I'm just taking a minute, just having a pause. I'm just having a pause. And then I'll come back and I'll say to him, that really frustrated me. And now let's talk about this. And he will quite often do that with me now. And I see those patterns. They do learn. And that's where that generational trauma comes in, is of learning, actually. It's unpicking those things that you were handed down, which is where that inner conflict comes in. But someone at some point has got to unpick it. Otherwise, the cycle just keeps repeating.
If you don't know, you can't change it. You know, even yesterday I was looking at how my inner voice was really, really negative. And I noticed a pattern that what I do is, if something's not working out, I'll stop trying. And then it definitely won't work out because I haven't tried that hard. And then I'll use it as evidence not to do the hard thing again.
Oh yeah.
And that is a pattern that I've always done. And I know where it comes from. It comes from my parents, the way they dealt with failure. There was nothing was ever a lesson. It was always like, oh, failure was final. And now I'm very much like, I'm trying, like always trying. You either win or you learn. And I tell my kids that you win or you learn.
Yeah. And it's reframing those things, isn't it? I got asked the other
Mm,
day about toxic positivity and what is a healthy reframe.
mm,
And that there is a healthy reframe of saying,
mm,
okay, no, I'm still trying. Sometimes that negative voice pops up, and those stories that I've been told, those core values that I've been given, I now have to unlearn them. I have to unpick
mm,
them and I have to reframe them. And that's the difference in the reframe, is being able to say, okay, but I was really taught that failure was final, that that was it.
mm.
If you failed, it was a big thing and that was it. It was done.
And you beat yourself up for it.
Yeah, and you beat yourself up for it and you
Mm,
don't learn anything and you just become really negative. But actually, I can learn from that failure so that I can do better next time. And I just have to keep trying to unpick those things. I think we often have this idea that we're going to break every single cycle. And I spoke to Emma Svanberg about this, Dr. Emma Svanberg,
mm.
who wrote, she's mumologist online,
Oh
and
yeah, I know.
yeah, she's brilliant. And she was saying we have this idea that we're going to break every cycle
Mm,
and that we are going to be the cycle breaker, and
mm.
we're not. And what we can do is make big changes and small changes that have big impact, but that our children can then go on and they'll have cycles that they want to
I
break.
love
It's
that.
impossible to
Mm,
not have something that they will want to do different, or something that they may want to address with you when they're
mm.
adults and say, I don't like that you did that. That impacted me negatively, and this is how. And you've got to say, okay, yeah, I can see that, and move forward through it and hear them out.
Because I like the idea we're all flawed people and we're going to
Mm.
raise flawed people. And actually, to be a perfectionist, if we raise a perfect person, then they've got to live up to that.
Yeah.
Like,
And how many of us have tried to live up to the idea
yeah,
of being perfect, of
no.
that we've got to be perfect. We've got to have the perfect grades. We've got to have the perfect outfit
Mm,
on for photo
mm,
day. We've got to have the perfect hair. We've got to
mm,
look perfect. But actually, the outside might look perfect, but the internal world is far, far from it.
mm,
So allowing those flaws and allowing your children to, when they see your flaws, accept and realize that we're all flawed and that
mm.
that's okay, and being accountable for it and building that repair.
I had a lovely conversation with a client the other day about how it's not about not having any messy parts of you. It's like about not hating your messy parts.
Yeah.
Like, I know that I am very scatty. I am very, like, I think I've got ADHD. I lose things.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
So and I just accept that that's just me. Like, I'll do things to try and be more organized, but I don't think, oh, I'm a terrible person because I'm scatty. I am.
Yeah.
I'm looking, when I go out, I'm looking for the other mum who's forgot the wipes, because she's probably my mum. That's the
Yeah.
kind of person I want to hang around with. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
like, when you accept your messy bits and you get to meet similar people who are like you, when you try and hide them, you don't find your people.
Yeah, accepting your messy bits. I really, really like that, because
Mm,
I think if there's anything that you are as a cycle breaking parent, it's
mm,
a bit messy,
mm,
because you are working against decades of
mm,
conditioning, of toxic beliefs, of navigating all of the generational trauma that's been handed to you. And you're having to unpick it and start to say,
mm.
oh, no, I don't like that bit, and move forward with your own beliefs quite often. And I always think about parenting without the blueprint.
Yeah.
You get given a blueprint, but the one that you've been given is not necessarily the one that you want to use. So now you've got to
Yep.
roll that up, put it aside. How do we parent without that healthy blueprint? How do
Mm,
we become the healthy parent that can accept their flaws and can say, yeah, things are getting a bit messy in here, but I'm doing my best. I'm always going to be accountable. There'll always be that repair.
mm.
I think holding firm to that when you think about breaking the cycle with your own children, if you choose to have children, so many people that I speak to who've grown up in these difficult families choose not to, because of the
Yeah.
fear of
I know.
repeating the cycles. And that's really difficult, because
Mm,
if you want to have your own children, if you want to, there's no obligation to do so, obviously, but if you
mm.
want to, it's so sad to think that you've held back from that because of the way that you were treated as a child,
Yeah, I
because you
have
can
clients
do
who say
better.
that. I
Yeah.
have clients who say that I don't know how to be a parent, so
Mm,
I'm not going to
yeah.
have children, and I don't know if they'll change their mind.
Mm,
But it's it is messy. That's the thing. We're just figuring it out, and we're hoping we're doing our best. But I
mm,
think one of the things I think is a good sign that you're probably doing a good job is that you care, because
yeah.
I've worked with lots of families who, excuse me, who think that it's ridiculous that they would have to do a parenting course.
Yeah.
If someone gave me a free parenting course, I'd be like, amazing,
Sign
thanks,
me up.
sign
Yeah.
me up.
Sign
And
me
then,
up.
but it's like, why would I need a parenting course? Like,
Yeah.
why? Everyone needs a parenting course because
Yeah.
we get given these humans and we don't know what we're doing. And if you think that you know how to raise a human at every single age and every single stage and every single child is different, then I don't know. Where did you get the secret?
Where did you get this Delulu? Because share it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that really is a huge thing, is in acknowledging that you don't necessarily know what you're doing, and that's okay. You don't have to be the perfect parent.
Mm,
There are going to be cycles that you are going to break, and there are going to be cycles that maybe you don't. And
mm,
being accountable for that, knowing that you're doing your best, is a huge indicator that you are on the
mm,
right path.
mm.
Natasha, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Yeah, it's been lovely. Really, really interesting, and yeah, a lot to come out. I didn't really know what I was going to talk about today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for chatting with me. Can you let people know exactly where they can find you, please?
So on Instagram, I am the imperfect underscore therapist. And my website is the same. No, my website is natashanyeke.com. And I am a coach. So I currently have a program, which is a 3 and 6 month program called Finding You Coaching. And
Amazing.
it's about understanding yourself through the journey of matrescence, which is the transformation we go through when we become mums, and basically becoming the mum and the person that we want to be once we become mums. Because it's not just about like being a mum, it's about learning who we are again. Because once we become parents, we become whole new people, because every relationship changes. And I think one of the things that massively comes up for so many people is things that they hadn't realized were a problem with their own relationship with their mum.
Yeah. Yeah. If I had a penny for everybody who said to me, I never realized that I had childhood trauma. I never realized that I
Mm.
had a difficult relationship with my parent. I never realized that I actually have very dysfunctional family until I became a parent.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd all be getting free therapy. We'd
Yeah.
all be there because
Yeah.
it's consistent thread.
Yeah.
Everything, your whole perspective shifts when you become a parent. You shift when you become a
Mm.
parent. And I love that idea of finding yourself again.
Mm. Okay.
Thank you so much. Guys,
Thank
I
you.
will speak to you again next week. And take care of yourselves. If you'd like to join in with the community, it is at unfollowing_mum over on Instagram. And then I am Harriet Shearsmith on TikTok. And there's lots of different things on there. I'm also Toby and Rue on Instagram as well, which is my personal account. Come and say hello. And if you would like to be featured on the podcast, then get in touch. Speak to you soon. Bye.